Radio Network.
Paragon 7 Studios.
You're listening to the Paragon of Broadcasting Excellence, the Lance Day Radio Network, coming to you live from Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, James Lewis III. Always a pleasure to be broadcasting coast to coast on our radio affiliates around the country, and of course, on Lance Day Plus. I'm going to go right in. I am very disappointed in the Pac-12 or the Pac-8 or the Pac-6, whatever they're calling themselves. Their teams, as soon as USC and UCLA bolted for the Big Ten, they just folded like origami. Where's your pride? I used to cover Arizona State when I was on NBC Sports Radio in Phoenix on KDUS, and used to frequently get letters from their program director, because I talked about how soft the West Coast was and how West Coast football was trash, and there was a bunch of tanned surfers and mama's boys and wussies that if they had to play in the Big Ten where it's 11 degrees. Now with global warming, it's that 11 degrees is more like 41 degrees. But if they had to play in cold weather, that they would just forfeit the game. And a lot of the stuff that I said about how soft people are on the West Coast is true, but it was in jest. That was back in my shock jock days where I was trying to get a rise out of people, trying to generate calls, generate ad revenue. But I'm very disappointed. Wasn't the Pac-12 president just bumping his gums a few weeks ago how the league was stable and how nobody else was leaving? So you had Colorado left to go back to the Big 12, which to me, that makes a lot of sense. Colorado is really a Big 12 school. They're not a Pac-10, Pac-12, Pac-8, whatever, Pac-4, whatever's left of them. They're not naturally a Pacific conference. And Utah, once out, they're probably going to go to the Big 12 also. Once again, they're a Mountain Time Zone conference. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Utah's a pretty good football program, but they're not great at any of the other sports. And they're not a national championship contender. But Washington and Oregon leaving for the Big Ten on Friday, that was huge. It was expected, but it just kind of shows where we are in the state of intercollegiate athletics. And that's kind of the death blow for the Pac-12. I know that you can't get as good of a TV deal because you're on the West Coast, so I get it. I spent a lot of time in my adult life on the West Coast. I lived in Seattle, lived in Phoenix. And nobody from the East Coast, nobody from New York, nobody from D.C., nobody from Philly, nobody from the Ohio markets, nobody from Atlanta, Charlotte, Miami, they're not watching college football. Even USC, even when USC had Reggie Bush, and Reggie Bush was running for like 13 yards a carry, nobody in Atlanta is watching that game against Stanford that kicks off at 8:30 Pacific time. So I get that. I understand that it's advantageous for the Big Ten to add the LA market because they already have the Chicago market and the New York market. So you have the three biggest markets in the country. And I also understand that you needed to have some other West Coast teams. You can't just have UCLA and USC. You need to have other teams out on the West Coast just logistically. UW's a great school. Oregon's a great school. You bring in the Nike money. So I get it. I assume – this is what I assume if I'm the Big Ten commissioner and I know the Big Ten from being an Ohio State guy, from growing up in Columbus, Ohio, I assume that their goal is to add Stanford and add Notre Dame, and then they're done. And then that would be an even 20. I don't think they want Cal. I definitely think that they want Stanford. Stanford plays a Big Ten style of football. They're a smash mouth program. Then you would have 5 schools on the West Coast. You add Notre Dame. Notre Dame plays Stanford. Notre Dame plays USC. So you already have some rivalries there. And then you've basically poached the best schools in the Pac-12 and brought them into the Big Ten. And then everybody else, they're SOL. Nobody cares about Arizona State, Arizona. Nobody cares. I mean, Utah's pretty good, like I said, but they're not a make or break school. Kyle Whittingham, if they don't go to the Big 12 and end up in the Mountain West or something, Kyle Whittingham will go to a better school. As a staunch fan of the Ohio State University, I love the idea of them playing in a rotation, USC and Oregon and Washington. I think that's great. I love the idea of Michigan playing those teams as well. Imagine USC going to Ann Arbor in November to play a game. That would be awesome. Or the Ducks going to Happy Valley. That would also be awesome. I think it's great for the Big Ten championship. It's always been a bye week for Ohio State or Michigan, whoever wins the Big Ten East. They play Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin's going to be better with Luke Fickell. But they play Wisconsin or they play Iowa, and those teams are just speed bumps on a 45-7 drubbing as Ohio State or Michigan is preparing for the college playoff, which they inevitably lose to an SEC team. So iron sharpens iron. And I get it with these contracts. I think that there's roughly $70 million to distribute from the contracts. So if you're Oregon, if you're Washington, you're up $70 million. I get that the Pac-12 can't get a contract because they only really truly can attract people on the West Coast in the Pacific time zone to watch the games. But it just doesn't make any sense. It's bad for every sport other than football. It's probably good for football. It's bad for regional rivalries. I want to see Ohio State play Penn State every year and play Michigan State every year. I think that Michigan will always be protected, even though even Coach Day has been talking about he understands that Michigan may not be the last game of the season, that they may move that game up at some point, which would be terrible. It's tradition that Ohio State plays Michigan the week of Thanksgiving, the last week of the season. And you can't add USC, and if they add Notre Dame and some of these other schools, you can't have it all, and I get that. But to me, this is going to be a disaster from a competitive standpoint. It's going to be really difficult for these 4 West Coast schools to compete, having to fly back and forth. It's going to be bad for the students. Yeah, I get it. The elite football players, they're going to the league. If you play for SC and you're a starting cornerback for SC, you're probably going to the NFL. You know, if you're a starting defensive tackle for Washington, you're probably going to the NFL. But what about these other sports where people are truly student athletes? I just think all the travel is going to be problematic, man. The young ladies that are on the volleyball team, they're not going to any professional league where they're going to make millions of dollars. A lot of these people are biochem majors. It's going to be very difficult to stay on top of your organic chemistry while on a Spirit Airlines flight from Palo Alto to Newark, New Jersey to play Rutgers.
Live from the Paragon 7 studios, you are listening to the Lance J Radio Network.
Paragon 7 Studios.
Rampage, the first lieutenant of the Universal Flipmo Squad.
Ate off like the assassin, now I'm blasting, I'm taking over. Stick you for your blue Range Rover. I told ya, Rampage, a real live soldier. Been in the game since the age of 13.
James Lewis.
Dwelling south of the Hudson, New Jerusalem in seclusion, using fake pseudonyms. I'm true bad, mine travels like a schizo and 2 tabs with do-rags hanging from my pockets. What, boy?
You are listening to the Lance J Radio Network.
As parents, we pay out the for school. So here's a novel idea. Just spend less on your kids. Amazon has great deals on everything kids need. Instead of spending more, he spent less.
Why would a person spend more money?
He's 8 and he gets it.
I'm 10.
That's less impressive. Spending less costs less, financially.
I spend less on my grandkids.
And they don't even know it. So spend less on your kids with Amazon's back-to-school deals.
It's fiscally advantageous.
I don't even know what that means.